Part 2. You will hear a talk by a volunteer who has been taking part in a project to find out what everyday life was like 2,500 years ago in Britain during the time known as the Iron Age. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
Jim Stevens has been taking part in an experiment to find out what everyday life was like in Britain over 2,500 years ago, in the period of history we call the Iron Age. He is one of a group of volunteers who have been living for the last 6 months in the sort of village that people inhabited in those days, and following the sort of daily routine that ordinary people followed then. So, Jim, tell us what you do on a typical day.
A typical day in the Iron Age village begins with rising at first light. I occasionally did that when I was at home because I loved having time to myself before the family got up. But here I do it every day because it's so light. Others also get up early because they find the straw beds rather cold. We start work immediately, usually tending to our fires which have died down in the night. I feed the cattle before starting to get breakfast ready, usually porridge that's been soaked the night before. It sounds horrid, doesn't it? But it's not so bad. As it takes such a long time to cook anything, we end up eating only twice a day. We have a late breakfast after a morning's work, and then in the evening we gather together as a community. Although the evening meal provides a chance for us to chat about the day, it can be quite chilly, so we go to bed pretty early. I think we're always hungry because we use much more energy than usual. It's all the physical exertion. A lot of time is spent just trying to get enough to eat, looking for berries and fruit and things like that. There are lots of other jobs to be done, like cooking, finding wood and keeping the fires going. The biggest priority for the blacksmiths working the forge is to tend the fire and to get it nice and hot so they can carry out their tasks. They've got various things to make, tools, cooking implements and so on. So life here is about looking after the animals and looking after ourselves. Everybody's always doing something round the fire as well. It's not as if we're just sitting there chatting. Just living, surviving, takes up most of our time. And actually, it's quite difficult to fit in other things around it. For example, you might be breaking hazelnuts, spinning some wool, or just doing things like straining milk. Here, you're finding out how to do different things every day, which keeps you on your toes and keeps you interested.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
And I understand that you even built your own houses to live in. Roundhouses built in just the same way that archaeologists think that Iron Age people constructed them. So tell us exactly how you build an Iron Age roundhouse.
It's a bit like putting up a tent at first, but without the benefit of ready-made metal poles. You mark the centre of your house with a wooden peg. What you do then is loop a length of rope around it and mark out the circle to give you the outer boundary of your building. Once you've got this, you then have to dig out the ground ready for the wall. And in Iron Age times, people didn't have shovels or diggers like we do today, but used tools which they fashioned from animal bone. It must have been quite hard work. Next, you have to start on the wall. Although there were several native trees around, like the ash and the elm, the ancients preferred oak for the wall posts, which they knocked into the circle they had dug. Don't forget to leave room for the entrance, otherwise you won't be able to get into the house. Now you can begin to see the wall of the house developing. To create the framework for the final wall, the stakes were not nailed or glued onto each other as they might be today. Instead, ones with holes cut into each end are slotted over the upright posts, making what to us looks like a fence. This procedure creates a very firm structure. To support the large roof, first you need to put up a good-sized centre post, which is secured with ropes and pegs. But it's not only this which is relied upon to hold up the roof. So the next thing you have to do is build around the post a timber scaffold tower, similar to the metal ones used in Britain today. This temporary structure of wooden poles enables you to put up the main supporting beams, which are then tied together with rope and fixed to the wall plate at the bottom of the fence. The top part of this tent-like construction is strengthened with 2 ring beams. Now the framework for the roof has to be completed. Rather like weaving a basket using rods from the willow tree, hazelwood rods are linked to the beams in parallel hoops. Now you can see the house in skeletal form. The tricky bit is thatching the roof because it requires great skill. I find this very difficult. First, you take reed bundles and cut them so that each is of equal length. Then you must fix them firmly so they won't blow away in heavy winds. The final part of the process is the daubing, which in effect is like modern-day plastering. Whereas today we use plaster and paint or wallpaper, the Iron Age people had a mixture of clay, cow dung and straw, which they daubed all over the inside and outside to give the house a smooth finish.
That is the end of Part 2. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 2.